Good morning, wanderers and fellow adventurers, and welcome to the next devlog for Daemon Change. With a little luck, you weren't expecting to hear from me today, which is exciting. I've actually been wanting to change things around for a while to make it so that I could upload a video every week, and I have made it to that point. However, that does mean that I need to be a bit more focused in my videos, and because they're going to be shorter, that means that we have no time to lose, so let's go. The quest this week was to make it so that you could actually attack something in the game, such as being able to attack a target dummy. This is a goal that I've had for a while now, but it just hasn't happened yet. In order to make a combat system, there are several quest objectives that I need to complete. First, I need to have animations. A lot of the functions of combat are based off of how and when the character moves. Next, I need to be able to have the engine understand the difference between tapping a button and then holding down a button. Surprisingly, that isn't a feature that's built into Unreal Engine, so it is something I'll need to make myself. Next, I need what's called an input buffer system. An input buffer just means that as one action is being carried out, you can actually queue up the next action instead of having to wait and then do things one at a time. Finally, the animations and the character are separate systems, and I'll need them to be able to talk to each other smoothly and efficiently. This isn't hard to set up, but it is something that will have an effect on everything else. Before we jump in, I do want to give a nod to my fellow adventurers on Patreon and the Wanderers in Discord. If you didn't know, this project has both a Discord server and a Patreon page, so if you'd like to help support the project, you can do so in either of those places. Or, even simpler, you can just subscribe to the channel. It is just that easy. Now then, on to completing the quest objectives. Getting the animations was probably the easiest part. Again, I'm just using key poses and extremes in order to communicate what the player is doing. I made a whole video about combat, link to that in the top right, and in that video we talked about attack patterns. I'm using that information here, and our basic attacks are alternating diagonal slashes. Another reason why I'm doing it this way is that I was able to save time by animating one attack and then just mirroring it over to the other side for now. These slashes are the attacks that players will do whenever they tap a button. If a player chooses to hold a button instead, they'll get a much more powerful leap attack, which looks like this. Once animations were done, I got them exported from Blender, imported into Unreal, and then I put them into my animation blueprint. This step is also really easy. This mess of arrows you're looking at is called a state machine, and all it really does is make a system for how animations change from one to the other. So, for example, this is the idle animation, and then while the idle animation is playing, if certain conditions are met, we can follow this arrow and then move over to the running animation. So remember, animations are separate from the character in Unreal Engine. However, I built the character using a handmade state machine, which works the exact same way this graph does. So basically, it's just stupidly easy to tie the animations and the character together, which is always great. Hooray! The next step was to update the state machine and the character, and this is where all that stuff about input buffering and such comes in. This is also where things started to get, we'll say, less easy. The first step was to make a system so that Unreal Engine could tell the difference between tapping and holding a button. And I made that system. And it worked. Next was to store that information into the input buffer system, and I made that. And it worked. The last step was to make a system so that the animation could tell the player when it's over, and then it's ready to move on to the next action. And I made that too, and that also worked. But the big boss this weekend happened when I tried to put all of those things together. Each thing I made worked on its own, but when I tried putting it together, it broke. Now, normally in game development, when something breaks, it usually breaks in such a way that you can kind of tell what's going on, or at least where you need to start looking in order to find the solution. But for this whole combat animation input buffering thing, I have no idea. I have no idea because as far as my infinitely smooth brain cell can figure, this all should be working. I can say that I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the input buffering system. Sometimes attacks get carried over to places they shouldn't, sometimes attacks happen twice, and sometimes attacks don't happen at all. And in theory, that would only really be happening if the input buffer, the thing that lets you queue up your button presses, was messing up somehow. But I've slapped my head against this problem for days, and no, man, this week's big boss has just kicked my ass. So the quest this week was to be able to attack a target dummy, and the quest status is in progress. Sadly, there is a big boss in my way, and until I defeat it, there just isn't a lot else I can do. But this is actually really exciting in a way because one of the biggest reasons I wanted to shift to making a video every week is I knew that sometimes I wouldn't be able to complete my goals before I had to make a video. And it's really important to share both my successes and failures, or even just my frustrations. It's cool. It's like a living story, something that's still being told, you know? So that's the quest progress for this week. I'm going to keep going at this big boss because it really is fundamental to moving forward. Remember, I'm transitioning over to weekly videos, so sometime around the middle of next week, I'll have the next update for you. And hopefully by then, I'll have been able to beat this guy I'm up against now. You can catch up on everything we've made so far or subscribe to the channel using these links. And finally, big thank you to the adventurers. Once this combat system is up and working, you'll have access to the next build of the game, which will finally have something for you to do. I've got a ton of work to do, so I'm going to hop back at that, and I will see you all in the next one.